And welcome everybody to another great episode of Cup of Joel. Ooh, that feels good, doesn't it? Rolls off on the tongue. You know, Cup of Joel kind of finishes abrupt, but Cup of Joel, that just slides right in. Hope everyone's having a good day today. Another good time period, as they say. So, I got another great episode for y'all. And the theme of today, which I really want to talk about, was religion. Ooh, scary stuff, huh? Don't worry, I'm going to try and make it interesting. More specifically, what I want to talk about today is spirituality. Okay, a bit of context on why I want to talk about this. So, recently, I realized something. So, I consider myself agnostic or atheist, meaning, maybe God exists, I don't know. I always keep in the place that perhaps I'm too stupid to see evident proof, but I don't think that I've had anything to convince me of his existence. So, and I also have a few counter arguments to God itself that I can actually go for later on, but for now, let's put that there. Anyway, so I consider myself an atheist or agnostic, and the thing that I find very interesting, though, is how I act in my day-to-day life. It's as if I act as if I was religious. So I will do things like I'll say, "Oh God," or when things go bad, I look up to the sky like if I was talking to someone. Sometimes if I have like that inner monologue, I have that inner monologue as if there was an exterior figure that was judging my moves, and not so much myself judging myself, which is a, to a certain extent, ridiculous thing, because there's no... See, people that judge themselves is kind of ridiculous when you think about it, because, like, you did the action, and then you're going to turn around on yourself and go, how could you? It's like, what do you mean, how could you? You did it. Anyway. But my point being that I act as if God existed, which I find quite fascinating when you think about it. So I wanted to explore that a little more today with all you, because I think that there's something quite interesting with spirituality, regardless if you believe believe in God or not. We talked about this last time, or one episode before, about how you don't really need, when we talked about the truth, you don't really need to know that God is real, you just need to have the faith. And I wanted to actually explore kind of that idea, because I think it's really fascinating if you get down to brass tacks, as they say. Alright, so let's start with this. In the beginning, right? Cavemen, going back there. I always loved going back to that idea because that's where the source material is, right? That's where the source code is. Anyway, you go back at that time and you imagine, how did they develop religion? Because guess what? The gods of today, they're not really the gods of before, huh? They kind of had that transition. Now, in the past, I think one of the first gods was this rock statue woman. You can look her up online. It's just this woman, kind of fat-ish, made of stone, of course. If I remember correctly, she was a deity of fertility, so you would build that statue and pray to her for fertility, and if it worked, well, your crops are supposed to grow. So that's the first. I don't know if there was another religion, but the first religious symbols came there. That's where you got the statues, or you can maybe say the paintings on the walls with the animals, but that's not really religious so much as it's storytelling. And so you can kind of say that religion, in a sense, started with two things that happened, right? Because in a sense, that statue wasn't just commemorating someone, right? Compared to the compared to the paintings on the walls, which were like, oh, we hunted, and in the honor of our hunt, we're going to paint this. But the statue was different because no one had that size, right? No one had that shape of this large woman. And it would be kind of weird to justify just building it out of nothing, especially building multiple, which I think was the key part. See, it's like, okay, one guy, maybe had a thing for it, but then if you keep making it, that's probably going to be a religious symbol. So you got to think, why did they start building it? Well, if it's the god of fertility, it goes as saying that most likely they had fertility issues. Now, there's two types of fertility issues, you could say. There's probably reproduction, meaning that maybe some people had difficulty reproducing, or their kids would die before they're coming out. And there was also the land, of course, that was not fertile, so they would be starving. So those things happened. Now, they had an issue, right? And then everything seemed lost. But as humans, we try to figure out solutions that are not so much rational, but we try to figure out solutions, period. And if no tool can immediately make things move, we might try to do something different. And this is where already we get to something quite interesting. So what did the human do? He looked at everything in the perceivable world, right? He looked at the stick, he looked at his wife, he looked at the water, and he worked with that, but nothing worked. And what he thought of is, what if nothing of what I'm observing is the only thing? What if everything I'm observing is not the only thing that exists? So that, first of all, is a pretty good assumption, right? It's a good reason. It's most probable that we don't know everything. So he goes, all right, what if there's another level, okay, outside of my perception that is interacting with me? And by the way, this probably developed also in the idea that, if you get surprise attacked by something, that's because there's something interacting outside of you that had an impact on you. Anything that looked mysterious, you could probably imagine that these people probably found things mysteriously, right? And then when they did, they would start thinking, maybe there's something exterior to me that is perhaps watching, perhaps not watching, perhaps I can interact with, perhaps I couldn't. Now, there doesn't mean to be multiple people that figure this out. Just one. And one person that thinks that's reasonable. Okay, so then he asks himself, what did I do before, in the past, to make this work, right? What did I invent in the past that made fertility work, and what didn't, and now did not work? So then he thinks about it, and then he says, what does fertility mean? What if, we're social creatures, so what if there's a social being, right? Okay. Now this is a little frisky. I love this, but I'm gonna try to be as concrete as possible. So there's two levels here that I'm gonna try to describe. Let's see if I can make sense of this. So the first level is the idea of when you say something like, oh, maybe there's another world outside of me. There's, we're talking about the exterior world. Everyone understands my point. It's sort of like it could be space or like a godlike place. Now, however, when the person says this, there's also another space that is also interacting with, he's interacting with without noticing, which is subconscious psychological locations. Now, they're not literal locations, but they are, you could say, metaphorical locations where things happen. So here's a good example of how do you know this location exists. Imagine you're at a party, right? And someone did something horrible to someone else at that party, okay? So like they both see each other at the party, and then there's this huge tension going on, right? And everyone sorts to have thoughts that are belonging into that psychological underrealm. A term for this is the collective unconscious, but that doesn't sound like a location, so for now, bear with me. So there's this place in the party, right? There's the literal place, and there's conversations, right? Normal conversations like, how was the weather? I love your dress, blah, 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 that are happening into that real space. Now, under that, right, there's that tension. Well, the tension may be like the border between both worlds, the psychological world that is sort of the unconscious and the conscious world where everyone's having their little conversations. Now, the subconscious world, that's where everyone kind of knows what's happening, right? That's where the 90% of the communication happens, because most communication is body-wise, and so this collective world is where a lot of the shit's happening. This is when, for example, when something's embarrassing, everyone starts laughing. That's sort of like everyone kind of saw it under, and then they're trying to bring you up in the physical, right? So, but here's the thing. People don't consciously take, awareness of this until it happens. So, meaning, let's say everyone feels the tension, right? Every individual feels that tension, right? So you could say the collective, in a sense, feels that tension. But the difference is that they're not telling each other that, right? So in a sense, it's still under in the subconscious world. It only becomes conscious where, for example, when we start manifesting. Like I said, if a kid does something embarrassing, at first everyone goes silent, and everyone thinks, oh my God, blah, blah, and then a few people start laughing, right? Which is a manifestation of that collective under. Now imagine, again, we go back to the party, where's the tension? At first, everyone's silent, right? The silence is already trying to communicate something. The next thing is everyone's trying to build their opinion. Some people don't know what's happening. Some people aren't. Then they look at each other. People look at each other, all right, to see who can inform me of this, who knows shit. So then we're already communicating with each other bodily wise, but we stay a bit subconscious because again, you're not sure what you're saying, right? You're just looking at people, trying to figure out who's at play, what people are thinking, what's the emotion in the room, right? I mean, you look at the two people that had the conflict. You're like, is that guy angry? Is that guy angry? Okay. And then finally, later on, maybe you separate and you talk to one of your buddies and you go, you felt that? That was pretty tense or something like that. And then you try to figure out what actually happened and then you get the context. And then at some point, more people communicate and then you bring it back to the conscious. Okay. Now, here's the thing though. How many people take the time to realize the subconscious communication? If you think about it, not many people. Sometimes you'll call it out as, like I said, the tension, because that's when it's the most clear. But think about an idea, right? People have an idea. So there's a book. I know I'm going through a lot of examples, but I just want to try to paint this picture. There's this book I read where they really show something fascinating. Essentially, the characters have to distract a guard to get they have to entertain a guard, and entertain in quotations, so try to figure out what I'm saying, wink wink. Anyway, they have to entertain a guard to get a to get a key to go back to their land, because it's war times, they're rich people, and there's one of the women that is a whore. Okay, she made money, she's not really happy about it, she just didn't really have a choice, so a prostitute, if you will. Anyway, all the characters except for the prostitute are married, right? And in the beginning, they don't know what to do. But then one person looks at the other, and that's kind of the description of the book, and they kind of look at each other, and then they kind of figure out a plan, right? But the thing that's interesting is they don't immediately talk about the plan, nor do they even know what the plan is consciously, right? So we know this because they go to sleep, and they barely talk about it. And then it's a slow transformation where they're like, starting to talk about this woman, try to be nicer with this woman, and then they try to figure out, well, I can't do it, and I can't do it, and why can't you do it, and why can't you do it, sort of to be forced to arrive at the conclusion that only her could do it. Now, technically, they figured out the plan much before, right? But nobody consciously, first of all, in the beginning, they didn't realize that plan, and as the plan progressed and people started to realize what they all had in mind, not anyone wanted to call it out. So that's a two levels. So there's like a level where they didn't realize, and another level when they did realize, but they didn't want to call it out. They wanted the plan to become inevitable, arrive to their feet, and they go, well, we don't have a choice. What if we do this? Anyway, so my point in this is not really the inevitability point. My point is sort of, we have ideas, okay, right? Way before we're even conscious about it. We'll have like a moment of consciousness of that idea, but it's just going to pass by. And people are going to communicate to each other partially that idea, right? Through word choice, to body choice, to anything, right? Where do you look at? How do you think? And blah, 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 blah. And slowly, one person is going to try to bring that idea, that collective idea, into the real world. Okay. So, let's go back to our people that started the religion. So, multiple people, I mean, you can imagine fertility is probably a big problem in the past, okay? So, you can imagine multiple people having problems with fertility. You could even imagine that if some people do have luck, everyone else looks at them, going, what did you do right? And then they start, looking at each other and trying to communicate, what are we doing? What's happening? And people have mysterious experiences, right? And they talk about it with each other. And as they're talking, the idea comes in, what if there's another world, right? What if there's an exterior world? Now, the thing is, there's two levels here. There's almost three. There's the level that in physical world, there's things that we do not know that exist, right? So predators, forces, they didn't even know what gravity was yet, light, time, space, blah, blah, dark matter, stuff like that. So there's that physical world that is actually correct. There's the perhaps spiritual world, which is kind of what they get to. And then there's the psychological world, right? That is the part that you cannot have access to. Now, when I say bring into consciousness, you have to understand the parts that you feel, the parts that you understand, those are not the subconscious world. This is the conscious world. That's when it's transforming. What I'm saying is there's this unconscious communication way before you even realize that the idea is even in your head. You will have an idea way before ever even thinking you had it, right? Again, a great example, I think I talked about this last week, but if you have a choice between two things, you've already taken a decision. Not only have you already taken the decision before you were presented, if you knew both decisions would come up, you already have that idea. As soon as, like for example, what do you want to do when you grow up? If you know a few options, you already have an answer. And if you were presented with another option, maybe your brain does another decision, and you will figure out that change with time, right? So I'll give you an example for me. I think I said it before. I was in theater in the past, and I had discovered philosophy. And without even me knowing, I had changed what I wanted to do. And I knew this with time when I realized that I slowly lost motivation for theater, and I had a lot more interest for philosophy. It was a weird switch, and I did not realize until much later that I had already taken my decision, because I was not motivated at all at doing the auditions before the auditions even came up. Like, I didn't even ask myself anymore where I wanted to go. I didn't even ask myself. No, it was completely blown, and I already started planning what university I was going to go in philosophy before I even knew I wanted to go in philosophy. Anyway, so regardless. So there's this world, right? And multiple ideas are coming through, and we were going back in the past. And so people are trying to bring it back into manifestation, right? Now, again, here's the thing. This subconscious communication is not God, right? This sort of subconscious world, it's not God, but it's very close to it in the sense that you don't know what happens, and then it seems to guide you, right? It seems wise, because it is, in a sense, wiser, right? It's all the parts of the brain that are working, because the conscious mind is not that smart, right? If you think about how many decisions you really take, how many decisions you really do, what you actually do consciously, there's almost nothing a conscious mind does, if not only to be conscious, right? Decisions, like I said, they're mostly already taken. In fact, they even did an experiment where they have a button, right? And the person had to think about clicking the button and click the button, or just click the button. And they had a machine basically tied up to the person, and they checked the brain waves. And it turns out, yeah, the person never took a decision, really. A part of their brain did, and they did much in advance before manifesting. And I think the only thing the conscious brain did was either say no, even if he could, like we don't even know if he could take that decision. So he either said no, like a veto card, or he just did it based on whatever happened. So the conscious mind could just be literally just like an observer in that sense. Okay. So the subconscious mind is a very smart part of the brain. The conscious mind is much weaker. I'm not saying it's completely dumb. I'm not a perfect, brain analyst or a psychologist. I'm just saying that the subconscious mind is much smarter, and it seems almost outwardly, because, like I said, the conscious brain is so much dumber than the subconscious brain. Right? You know so much more than what you think you know. And so if you, for example, discover something with your subconscious mind, you almost think it's something that comes outside of you. You go, how the hell did I figure that out? How the hell did this idea come to me? Well, that's the thing. First of all, it's not only yours, it's the collective's thoughts, right? And because we naturally share things without realizing it. And so these great ideas come to you, and they feel like they're not yours because consciously you didn't think about them, and you don't even know how they came up. Like an artist who draws or writes, it comes up to you, and it feels stronger than what you could ever present. And so to you, it almost feels divine, right? Okay, so you had an idea. What if there's something exterior to you, which is technically true, right? To a certain extent. And then your brain starts working on this, right? Now, the conscious mind gets that idea at some point, but it doesn't understand as much as subconscious, and I'm not even sure at that time that the subconscious even understood that idea, because it's a very complicated idea. And so it starts thinking about this, and it goes, okay, there's another world outside of me. Now, how do I use this world? How do I interact with this world in a way where I can get what I want? Now, it's a big leap in logic to say, let me just build a statue out of a rock and pray to it. But essentially, praying is just hoping, right, to whoever may hear you, okay? So imagine, in the physical world, Imagine there was a person that was following you around all the time, right? And was taking notes, kind of like a Santa Claus, right? Like the elves of Santa Claus. Imagine Santa Claus was real, and he sent his elves to listen to what you wanted for Christmas instead of you sending a letter. Anyway, and you had an elf follow you around, and he was always in the background. Now that's a physical background, right? But again, I'm not sure how the brain interprets this, but let's go with the flow right now, all right? Okay, so imagine that there was this person that follows you. Now, what would you do if you wanted a certain type of present? You would probably go, oh, well, I really wish I had this computer, okay? Say it out loud, and then, oh, wow, I got the computer, okay? Because it's in the exterior world. Okay, now imagine again, we go back to the past. You're a human. You know that potentially there's things outside of your control that can hear you, see you, which again, in the physical world is an actual thing with predators, with people hiding, etc., etc. So you go, okay, what if there's something outside of me that I can't see, that can hear me, that could potentially help me, okay? Let me wish upon a thing, okay? Now, the thing that's interesting with that is also the fact that we're social creatures, right? And in a sense, when we do that, we also communicate to each other because, the elf, that's your parents, In real life, like when you get to, that's your parents. Your kid looks at a TV show, goes, I really want that. Your parents is the elf in the background, okay? So, in a social context, it's even smart there because it technically is. There is technically this voice, okay? Think about the homeless guy, right? Who's like crying because he doesn't have a shirt. I'm not trying to insult homeless people, but let's say he doesn't have a coat, whatever. And then the social people see that, and one person goes, I'm going to buy him something. Or what if someone hears that he's hungry? They're going to buy him something. Maybe not. Maybe they will. My point simply is that, in a sense, there is a voice outside listening, right? And there's paying attention. When you post things on social media, it's another great example. You're kind of going, oh, I sure wish I had this, right? Okay, so again, there's this idea, which is what I'm trying to point out is sort of that there's multiple layers, so it's not that far-fetched. Like even because a lot of people when they think about spirituality, they think people are morons, right? They think that there's like a spaghetti monster in the sky. But I don't like that way of thinking because if you think about it, there's a lot of logical layers here, right? Like I said, the hunter that invented this, there's multiple layers that he's right? There's, like I said, there's a physical layer. In the physical layer, there's an actual predator that could listen to you. There's social, so people could actually hear you. And again, there's a third one too, is the simple fact that there could be a physical being unknown to you that is not like something like a predator or lion. Like, for example, aliens. I don't know. It is, as much as I'm not trying to say aliens exist, my simple point is the fact that something like an alien could exist is as much something you could wish upon, right? Because if they did, and they did care, in that possibility, which is not an impossibility, so because it's a possibility, if you wished upon what you wished to have, you might have it, okay? It's at least better than not doing it, which I think that's actually the point. I think a lot of spirituality, if you break it down, it's not necessarily the fact that we know for sure, but it's simply that it's a better bet. In fact, there's even a philosophy about this. A guy trying to prove that you should be religious, he said, listen, if you believe in the God and you're right, you'll go to heaven. If you don't, you go to hell, right? If you're wrong, if you don't believe in God and you're wrong, you go to hell. But if you do believe in God and you're wrong, nothing happens, right? So his point was simply that it is wiser to believe in God than to not believe, okay? And I think in that same point, going back again to the hunter or the gatherer or whatever, it is a better bet to wish upon something of the unknown than to do nothing, right? Because in a sense, you can also see this in a lot of movies or cartoons or whatever. It's like even the guy who's not religious still prays to God when everything is like when he thinks there's no way out, right? The Rick and Morty does that, like if you ever watch that show, there's an episode Rick is about to die and he prays to Jesus, but the thing is, as soon as he's saved, he goes, there is no God, But the point simply being that maybe he doesn't know, maybe that's a possibility. It's the smartest move to do, and so. Our ancestors had these ideas that are not completely wrong, and they go, okay, let me express what I want to the world, right? And see if I have a response. Okay? And now, again, I'm spitballing here, but we could imagine that most likely one of these people did it at a certain time where it actually worked. Okay? For example, he prayed for fertility for his wife, and his wife had kids. Now, of course, if you can rationalize and go, course, those two things aren't related. I know, like I'm aware that most likely those two things were not related. But the thing is, when you did it, when the ancestor did it, he could still believe that it didn't happen because of his prayer. But he can also assume that maybe it happened because of his prayer, and if it did, he should probably try it again, right? So you can imagine that one of them did a prayer to a certain way, and then he did it again, and it worked twice, okay? And then he comes to a conclusion. It's not a perfect conclusion, but he comes to a conclusion that maybe there is a being that is listening to me. It still could be coincidence, but in his position, it is much wiser to believe that there's something out there. So what does he do? He goes, okay, so far, if he was an actual being, right? Now we get back to social. If he's an actual being, he just gave me like 2 or 3 good hits, and I've given him nothing. Okay? Now if it stopped, and maybe it happens, maybe he goes to that conclusion after it stops working. So he does 2 prayers and it works, and then he does a third one and it doesn't work. So then he goes, it's either it doesn't exist, or it might exist, but I didn't give him anything in return. Right? Which would be unfair. So let me give him something in return. Now, in the past, there's a lot of things they could give you in return. Maybe he sacrificed food. Maybe that's the first thing that happened, but we don't have recollection. So maybe he sacrificed food. Maybe he sacrificed water. Maybe he did more prayers. Maybe he thanked them, right? And maybe one guy decided, I'm going to build a statue, or I think it looked like. And then when he built it, it worked. Right? So what did he do? He told his friends, hey, I built a statue, try it. And then maybe 2 or 3 tried it, and it actually worked. Or at the very least, this is another thing that could happen, they build it, and they think it works. Okay? This is placebo, right? So let's say, for example, you're sick, you build a statue, and you feel better. Okay? There's placebo in that. So literally, you're going to feel better after you build the statue and you pray to it, because your brain's going to think, oh, I'm better now, so it'll make you feel better. But they're also, you can recover from disease. Okay, so you can imagine that there's a lot of these things happening, and with time, there's this sort of filtering out where certain symbols start working, certain prayers start working because simply odds, and they kind of get filtered out, and the type of God also gets filtered out. Because guess what? If you imagine a God that gives you everything you want all the time, guess what? It doesn't work. That kind of God will not survive. A God who gives you everything without any condition, if someone makes that up, right, and they test it and it doesn't work, that God doesn't work, right? But if your other God, who could sometimes work or not, seems to work more because, you do a prayer, sometimes it works, you do a prayer, sometimes it doesn't, you go, oh, maybe your God is true, well, he's going to survive. So that's a sort of an evolution, if you will, of symbolic gods, okay? Now we have another level that comes in. And this is, I find this so fascinating. So, again, there's symbolic stories that come in. So, you build a statue, right? You give maybe this goddess a name, okay? So you go, I don't know, your name is Vanessa, right? And then you pray to goddess Vanessa. So people go, okay, how do you know how she looks like? Why is she here? Because that's what happens, right? First thing is we discover something, the fire, then we figure out why does the fire do what it does, right? Because if we can figure out how it works, maybe we can exploit it more. Because, like I said, this works for the gods too. Okay, so this god works when I built the statue. Why did it work when I built the statue, but not when I don't know, sacrificed a pumpkin to it? Okay, and then people are like trying to rationalize it. Now, of course, you might say everything you can rationalize is not true because you're making it up on the spot. Perhaps that is the truth, but again, here's the rationale. You make a story, okay, that explains why a statue works, and then you make the statue, and then if it works, then the story is correct. If it doesn't work, maybe it's because you didn't write the story properly. So you also do the thing properly. Now, there's also other things in there, which is the point of a story. The point of the story is to teach you something that could be useful in the future. And stories also evolve. Think about Red Riding Hood. It survived because it taught kids to be careful of strangers. Hansel and Gretel, same idea. Don't follow a woman that's going to promise you candy. Well, actually, to be more precise, Red Riding Hood is more about predators, and the other one, I don't really know. I guess it's also predators, but it's sort of like, it also could be like evil mothers, right, that stuff you and finally basically consume you because they don't have a life. It consume you in the fact that they they keep you in their house, right? Make you fat and useless like a couch potato, so then you don't escape. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Point being that stories survive if they're useful, if they teach what we want them to teach, okay? But also, if you don't know this, most religions have poetic starts. So there's like poets that write songs, and those songs, for example, the Greeks, a lot of that is that. It's just poets invented songs, and they spread their songs, and then they kind of created a story. Now, the thing is, it doesn't mean that the first people, like the writer might not have thought at first that his story was true. Maybe he rationalized it. Maybe he didn't. Or, this is also something that happens a lot. Maybe he invented the story and then later on believed it was true. There's a lot of fake prophets in history that seem to know in the beginning that what they're saying is complete ridiculous, but because what they do later on seems to be effective, they start asking themselves, well, maybe I am right partially. Maybe there is something to this, and half of it is baloney, but another half is true, right? So, like, for example, the preachers that kind of started off to make a lot of money, but then somehow their taking of money helped people. They're like, oh my God, I got saved because of this and this. And it's like, well, maybe God is happy that I'm taking people's money because I'm a good person and, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. But the point being is that maybe they start believing it themselves too. Okay, so they develop these stories. And also, this is another thing you could think about. The best stories with the best gods that are most useful, right, that teach you the best types of traditions, are also going to create the best civilizations. And then you're also going to have this evolution where two civilizations meet, they fight, and the person with the best culture that made their civilization so great will survive. Okay, and you can have this great example with the Greeks and the Egyptians, okay? So before the Egyptians, there were a ton of other little civilizations, right? They all started to have their own gods. And some of them maybe taught you to be more aggressive. Maybe you had to sacrifice, a foot. Let's say that. Let's say you had to sacrifice your foot, right, to get fertility. And then the other one, you just had to sacrifice a fruit. And another one, you just had to be really grateful and help your peers, okay? Now, one of those civilizations gets, fertility or not, but at the very least, they set up themselves in a position where their civilization is stronger together. And then they meet the civilization where they cut the foot off. Guess who wins? Of course, the civilization that promotes cooperation. And so their stories are passed on. Now, they might take a few parts of the other stories, right? Because a lot of times we share each other's stories. So they mingle their stories and they take the best parts of other people's stories. And they create a better religion, a stronger religion with more logic and sense and good traditions and all that. They meet another and blah blah, and then it accumulates, and then you have something like the Greeks and the Egyptians where they have multiple gods. This is really important. If you think about the first religions that came in, there was a lot of gods, and there was cities where a specific god was prayed to, right? And then afterwards, multiple cities had multiple gods, and they kind of try to figure out which one is the best and which one do we could. So think about this. Let's go back to our subconscious idea. Okay, so we see this as religion, right? We see this as gods that we believe exist in the conscious world. Now, here's the question that I find so freaking fascinating. What is happening subconsciously, right? What is happening in the underworld, in the communication that's happening where humans have that doubt? Humans might know that it's not real or they are real. What I believe is that in the subconscious world, we are just trying to make the best civilization ever. I don't know if that's our objective. I don't know if the subconscious is indeed conscious, but I do know that if you kind of think about the subconscious, kind of like a machine, it simply works in this perfect pattern, right? It goes, this works, go. This doesn't work, go. And they try to figure out, why does this work? Why does this not work? And they figure out these really, really complex ideas, which what we do when we figure out complex ideas, we can't really just bring them into words. No one can bring a really complicated idea the first time they understand it into words. Like if I teach you something that's really complex and I tell you repeat after me, it's really hard. Okay, if you go through a traumatic event and you try to explain it, it's really hard. The first thing you'll do is you'll react with your body, and then afterwards you'll do art, and then you'll explain it. So think about this. we figure out things that are really complex, okay? About survival, about fertility, about disease, right? That we do not understand, first of all, the details. We just understand like mild patterns in our brains. Our brains are sort of developing these patterns that are very complex because we don't understand all the details and we don't understand exactly how the pattern functions. But our subconscious is kind of developing this and communicating with other subconsciouses, if you will, developing this sort of big idea, okay? And then slowly but surely we start to produce these stories. So here's a good example. I'm not trying to trash Muslims at all, but if you think about some religions, for example, why is pork seen so badly in Muslim culture, or in other religions there's specific meats that are seen like do not eat that meat, okay? And even if, let's not even take the religions that are today, don't take Muslims or Christians, all that. Let's take old religions. In old religions, some food you couldn't eat, okay? Now what if there was a pattern where anyone who ate that certain type of food, right, started to feel sick, okay? And then we did not know it consciously, but our subconscious did, okay? Because maybe the subconscious, okay, let's say, for example, I don't know, you eat turnips, and then the turnips are a bit rotten, and people don't know it. So the thing is, you slowly get sick, and consciously you wouldn't know that you're getting sick, but subconsciously, your brain is noticing that other people are getting pale, okay? Or other people, there's little signs of fatigue and stuff like that are noticing. And they're going, what did they take? And then they look at other people, and there's communication between all of us subconsciously, and we figure out turnips are bad, okay? And then slowly, consciously, we invent this story, right? Where turnips are used to poison the main character, okay? And then we start to go, don't eat turnips because like the main character, X, Y, and Z happen. Now, some people will still eat turnips, and they're going to be fine, but some people won't and will live longer and better lives, okay? And then the tradition will sort of be encouraged, okay? So these sort of, there's a term for this, so it's like half-truths or metaphorical truths, where essentially, if you believe in this thing, you will survive, therefore it is metaphorically true, okay? Okay, so, subconsciously, this is developing, right? Multiple religions, and the subconscious mind is developing these really complex ideas, okay? And then we develop religions, and at first there are multiple gods, and then with time, if you might have noticed, they become one god. So there's a lot of religions where there's only one god, right? Where before there was multiple, now there's one. Or there's one in the form of three, like the Trinity, which is a very interesting thing. And here's my theory about the Trinity. I think it is about the metaphysical world, because this is what is so fascinating to me. Well, one of the things I find so fascinating about religion is that if you break down religion, spirituality, they're talking in multiple levels all the time, right? When you're talking about a story in the Bible, you're talking about a social lesson, right? You're talking about a subconscious psychological state, right? Like a hero's journey. Like Jesus is a hero, mythological character. He's also a literal character, and he's also there's abstractions of multiple things in the character that is Jesus. And so when you talk about his story, you're really talking in multiple levels, right? And I think also that's why it feels so powerful, why like you read a story and it's so compelling, because we built these stories to have such an impact on multiple levels. So you'll read a story and then you'll realize this works in the literal world, this works in the social world, this works in the psychological world. And not only that, this is a big thing. If you ever talk to a religious person, a lot of religious people, when they have problems, they go back to their books and they read, and they kind of find the message in their books. But think what that means. Your brain have an issue. We make these books through generations of people filtering, stories to an extent. I'm not saying that we changed them completely. I'm just saying that these are the best books, right? Because they survived. There's a lot of religious books that, did not survive because they were not useful. Now, these books have, right? And so people read those books, and there's some very precise things, and your brain is going to look at all the data and it's going to be like, I need this, right? So that phrase will compel you, right? It'll come out, and you'll feel like this is like the God that's talking to you, but it could actually just be a psychological thing. So it's your brain going, ooh, that's a good solution. Where did that solution come from? All the ideas of the community, right? We all built these ideas, and we found a way to put them in words that we might understand subconsciously. Okay, Now, like I said, there's multiple levels. Okay, there's another level, which is the literal level. This is where we get to the dogmatic. We get to the dangerous part. Okay? This is where all the things are problematic. Now, the reason religion is dangerous, to a lot of extent, is because we're trying to figure out some stuff. But the strength of a religion, of a story, is amplified if we believe it is real. Okay? So let's go back to the turnip thing. If you think turnips are poisonous, naturally, you will not eat turnips. If you think turnips are sometimes poisonous, but you're not, like I said, it's too complex at the time because we don't understand how rotting works, we don't understand about diseases, so we just know that sometimes they can be bad. You're going to eat some turnips, and maybe sometimes they're going to be rotten, right? And so those people are going to get sick. It's only the people that believe for sure that turnips are made by Satan and don't therefore never take them, right? Or for example, you should never kill your brothers and sisters, right? You should never, because you'll go to literal hell, not figurative hell, because if it's figurative, you won't actually avoid it. If it's literal burning hell, you're not going to do it, okay? And so a lot of strength comes from literally believing that something is true. But here's the problem. That same strength can be used to do horrible things. If you really believe that there is a deity outside that wants you to cut your foot, okay, to save your kids, you're going to cut your foot. But guess what? You're actually worse off. But the thing is, you don't know that, right? You think it actually worked. Now, you know when I said two civilizations meet and they fight? That's also a big part of it, is that if you believe that your God is real and the other side doesn't, you win because you're going to push harder. You're going to think you're going to win. You know, people, boxers, when they fight, they assume that they're going to win. They don't go, I'm not going to win, because then they psych themselves out. You have to believe it's true. You have to get that placebo, to get that extra energy, to get that strength, right? And also to be volunteering, because if you believe that there's an omnipresent God that's forcing you to go to war, you're going to go to war, right? Because you want the best for your community and yourself, and you don't want to make the big man mad. So this is the problem, where the power of a religion is not just in the fact that it's wise because it's old. It's in the fact that we think it's literal, right? That it's stronger than everything we could ever understand. And again, the power, great responsibility, or the fact that a sword is dangerous and has two edges. Here we have religion, where we believe things are literal truth, and then they kind of get strong. Now, this is especially true with morality, right? When you think about what is good and bad, if it's backed up by God, it's really powerful. And I think that's the big reason why dogmatic, by the way, if you don't know what dogmatic means, is essentially to follow something, well, like a dog. You don't question it. You just do it without question. And so, if you believe that is true, that these are the laws of God, you're going to follow them, right? I mean, I've seen a psychopath who's a Christian, and he was a literal psychopath, and he had a history of crime. But because he actually believes that God existed at some point, because he converted, he's harmless now because he follows the rules, right? But it's because he literally believes it, right? It's not because he's a good guy. He's a psychopath. He could kill you and not feel bad about it. But he does believe that it's true. And even if he's selfish, he still goes, well, I don't want to burn in hell, right? So he acts out. And so, how does that happen? Well, again, our subconscious, I don't know if our subconscious thinks it's real or not, but our subconscious doesn't really mind too much, as long as the results are done. To the extent of, our subconscious will only make things conscious if necessary, right? Because that's effort. Okay, let's go backwards. The brain wants to reduce the effort used, right? You don't want to work hard with your brain. If you're able to simplify things, your brain is super happy, because simplifying things means less energy, and less energy means I don't have to go get more food, and therefore I have more chances to survive. So anything I could do to reduce the amount of energy I'm using, the better. Okay. So the less communication I have to do subconsciously to conscious, right? The more I have a chance to reduce my energy, and therefore the more I have a chance to survive. Now, if you do an action and I don't have to convince you rationally to do it, then I don't have to subconsciously communicate all this complicated data into consciousness before, because that's so hard to do, right? You need so much information, and sometimes your brain doesn't even have that information. So what did I do? They go, just believe, right? If you just believe it's true, you're going to act like it even though I don't understand it. Like I said, the turnip thing, we didn't understand diseases, but if you just believe, the brain doesn't have to do effort to understand it. You don't have to question the story. That's why people didn't, I believe that's why people didn't criticize the story. I think it's because if you criticize the story, then you lose that power. You lose the power of why volcanoes work, why the sea's like this, why this, why the laws and logic and all that. You must not question it. I mean, the first philosophers believed in gods without a question, and then they just built other stuff, right? And God himself was never questioned for so long. Right? There was no one that questioned him because it is not useful, because we did not even have anywhere close of the information. So our brain goes, listen, it is much more useful for us to believe in God. Don't ask questions. Just assume that he's real and go on. And at best, invent more arguments for it. And so there we have it. A very interesting there's multiple levels of action happening. And so when someone's criticizing a religion, they're really missing a point, which is that there is so much going on there. And when you think someone is, being ridiculous because there's so many ways to contradict your book, it's really like you're not looking at it to enough levels. There's so many levels of what you're talking about. And again, the problem with a believer is if they believe it literally, right? Because again, it's useful. You can't criticize any of it. That's the dogmatic part. Because if you believe it literally, all of it has to be true. Sort of like, unless you can kind of tweak it around. So that'd be like, if the Bible is absolutely by God, right? You cannot change it without criticizing God himself and then losing that power, right? So you could have that reason why you try to find the faith of someone and they're kind of blocked. And if you look at future generations, we're really messed up. People that have lost God in a sense, because we're much more nihilistic, right? We don't know where our future holds. Most people don't want to settle down immediately. We have more freedom in one sense, but also a lack of purpose in the other. And the big thing too is that, of course, we have to understand things literally, right? When you have spirituality, you can skip so many parts. But in the literal part, now you have to sort of deal with the main things, right? And it takes time. And most people won't have those answers. And it's kind of annoying when you don't have those answers because it's really scary. I mean, for example, if you thought you were going to heaven, you don't have to worry. You're fine. Just be a good person. You'll be fine, right? So they kind of be calm about that. But we have to confront death. And then also, why should we be kind to others? And then we also lose our sense of community, right? Because that's a big one. Religion kind of helped us with community. But it's much harder when no one has that belief that we can share and those values that are defended by this omnipresent being. But again, so what I'm saying is, in a sense, because the conscious kind of lost its argument, right? Because we don't go necessarily just believe by faith. The subconscious is a problem. Because now it has to justify every position that it's done before, right? That for generations it didn't have to do. But now it has to do it rationally. So it has two options. Either to prove to you that God exists and try to prove to you that this book works more than others. Or try to explain everything that they have explained in a very complicated book in a logical way, right? And not just a logical way that you can understand, right? That's going to be really hard. And so I think one of the things you can kind of see that nihilism, I'm not actually that negative. I don't think this is the end of the world. I actually think there's a great positive here, which is simply that if we're patient, we will find a explanation for a lot of this, right? And a reason why we should do and other things. Maybe meaning will lose themselves. Maybe we'll lose that sort of why should we do it, Maybe the meaning will have to be found in each and every single one of us, right? We'll have to find our own meaning of why to do things. But as much as the explanation for why things are good based on that meaning, Actually, now I think about it, just a little side quote. I still think the meaning thing is fine, because if you think about evolution again, it's like, okay, the people that don't have a meaning and that die off because, like, let's say, I'm not trying to make, not trying to be cynical too much about this, but people that are, let's say, super lose meaning and then they can't live on, so they don't live on, will not survive, and therefore the people that, don't have meaning but find a way to survive will evolution. Therefore, even that perspective will survive unless everyone loses their meaning and doesn't live on, in which case that would kind of suck. But I like to be positive about that kind of stuff. I think we'll figure out a lot of these issues to an extent. I think there's always going to be some mystery, and we can always put God there, I guess, for now. That I find that if you look at religion, God is kind of like the there's a word in French, it's signé, but I don't know, page holder. He's the page holder of the world, of the universes. So yeah, and again, the thing is, you can still go get that information, right? Remember, it's still a lot of wise information worked in if you respect the craft, even if it's not backed up, right? Even if you're not religious, you can go back and try to figure out what is the actual interesting points, right? And try to contextualize it, right? Why in that period of time this was useful? Is this still useful today, right? What is the story? Great, and by the way, you can also do this with just great novels, There's some novels that are really big because, again, they touch these subconscious lines. They tell the stories that our brains are trying to figure out in a way that you can understand, right? In a way that they don't have to explain everything point by point. Because it's sort of like, if you can watch a movie and understand something that would take you like years of university to understand, then your brain is so happy about it. It's like, you just get it. So you go, finally, awesome. And so I feel like, in a sense, we're going to have that in stories. And, of course, right now, we also have to deal with a lot of different kind of cult-like entities that are getting created in multiple domains, where essentially we're trying to find our meaning in other things but God, right? So you'll have politics, where people get really into it in both sides, right? Left and right, doesn't matter. We get really invested into our politics, and it becomes almost a religious figure. We have people that turn to money. Money is that figure now. Some people turn into some sins that I'm not going to go into for now, but maybe later. There's multiple types of cult that are coming out, stuff like that. So we're trying to... Oh, and we also have K-pop, with people that are obsessive over these people, almost in a religious way, or just fangirls and fanboys about pick a topic, the obsession. There's video games where people lose themselves over there and kind of become this, it's not necessarily that we turn into religion kind of thing, but it's more so that these people kind of get lost into a place where there is meaning. Or again, you can also have really nerdy people that turn their things into this religious structure. So in any case, we're looking for meaning. Our brains are trying to figure these really hard things, and I think I'm hopeful for it. And I hope I made it clear. I find a topic so interesting because, again, this is, to me, there's a few things that humans have that are fundamentals. And I would say the first one is probably something around sexuality, because since we're creatures, period, we have sexuality, and so that one is ancient and has a lot of things to go through, and I'm sure I'm going to talk about it to an extent later on. So sexuality would be the first one, and I'm not saying it's only sexuality and religion, but I'm saying religion is another big one, because like I said, since we developed those stories, there's all this subconscious building, right, and it's been refined throughout the generations, and now still today it's being refined. Look at how gays in the books, in the Christian book, said no bueno, and now some people are saying no, it says it's good, and other people are still debating that it's not. But you can kind of see the progress where religion is kind of following the politics and whatnot. This always happens, and we always translate some books, and they're still always useful to an extent. We still tell our kids Red Riding Hood, and so we're still going to have the Bible today until we figure out a way to rationalize it in a way where a kid would listen to it, or an adult would listen to it and go, all right, I understand, and I'm going to follow it. So what's my point? I guess respect religion for now. If you are religious, take everything I say with the only hick that your God might be real, so everything I say could still be potentially accurate, but also the dogmatic part, just try to not be dogmatic. That's it. Just don't follow. You can question. That's all. I actually have an argument for this. If you do believe in a God, you should question him because let's put it this way. Let's say I believe that God exists for sure. Then questioning his book is only trying to get myself closer to him, right? So in a very sense, it's if I don't question him, it's because I'm afraid that I might find that he's not real, right? But if I believe he's real and I know he's real, then questioning it is fine. It's actually just refining your belief. So if you are religious, I would recommend just making sure you're not dogmatic. If you're not, take what I said as I said it, if you understand it. Anyway, this one was a pretty long one. I could ramble on forever. Hope you enjoyed. I certainly do. I just find it so fucking fascinating, all those levels, and maybe we'll try to go back into detail. If you have comments about this, please let me know. If you have any comments about the show itself, please let me know. I know some people have messaged me or told me privately that they wanted to see my face. That will happen. And also, I am planning also to later on bring other people. But again, we're only in episode 4, so let's give me a bit of time to run, shall we? So this was Cup of Joel. I will see you next time. This was fun. This is me, Joel, signing out. Goodbye, everyone.